Would it be right that I recognize questioners, sir? Because who knows but that I've planted someone. I might not be the right person to point to. You trust me? More fool you. Sir?
What do you mean by the phrase God is
Dickensian? Well,
Dickens?
yes. I'm sorry, did I maybe slur that? No. Yeah, I think his death was Dickensian, and it's touching in a way for someone who wrote so much about the Victorian London of Dickens. That he died of poverty and tuberculosis years before he needed to, and of overwork. I mean, that's how Dickens's characters often check out. You know, in the debtor's prison of a chill. Sorry, I'm sorry if I garbled that. You were very polite to go on listening after that. Comrade.
Yeah, just a quick question. Why do you think he directed criticism only against Stalinist Russia and not against Hitler or Germany?
Did everyone hear the question? I was asked to say why Orwell directed his criticism only at Stalin's Russia and not at Hitler's Germany. And then the gentleman did save me slightly by saying, or had he misunderstood me? Well, I put myself in your safekeeping, ladies and gentlemen. Did I imply that he had no criticism of Hitlerism? Did you think that too? Are you? Yes, more like it. Or are you too polite? That's the problem with this country. Everyone is too polite, too courteous to visitors. You might have thought I hadn't made this point. You might leave me wondering if I was that inarticulate. That's not polite. That's cruel. It's not courtesy at all. It's an abuse of hospitality. What I did say, sir, and I apologize if I phrased it so poorly, was that if you look in Orwell's writing for a direct attack on Hitlerism, you won't really find it. He hardly mentions it in his writing, except to assume that anyone of average emotional health regards it as he does, as something evil to be destroyed. He doesn't feel a case needs to be made. And it took me, I'd been reading him for years before I noticed that there is no Orwell essay against fascism. There isn't one. All he did was to take a rifle and go and see if he could stop it physically. It was more like a vermin control point, I think, to him, than an ideological one. Whereas with communism, you had to argue against the illusions of civilized people who thought that there might be a higher synthesis, a better society available, by following the lead of a one-party initiative. And that did take guts and nerve. So I really hope I haven't left anyone in any doubt on that point, because I would be awfully sorry to do so. Now I have the judgment of Paris. I don't know who to choose. Sir?
Was his problem with Stalinist communism or with Marxism?
Well, the gentleman asked, was it a problem with Stalinist communism or Marxism? Now, I claim in my book to be the first person to point out something that, again, I should have noticed years before I did. If you've read Animal Farm, by the way, could I have an idea, just for my own sake, a show of hands of those who have read it? Okay, that's great. Well, then you know the allegory now, and you may know something of the history of the Russian Revolution. In the whatever view you take of the Russian Revolution, it's inspired by Karl Marx, who is very easily recognized as the dying old major. It was wonderful when John Major was Prime Minister of England, actually, partly for that reason, who makes the prophecy that one day the animals will throw off the yoke, so to speak, and that then there is a revolution, and that it's led by two pigs. Oh, wait, I should do the Russian one first. So there's Karl Marx, then there's a revolution in which Lenin, Trotsky, and to a much lesser extent Stalin take part, which vanquishes the Tsarists and the foreign intervention from the West at some cost, dissolves into fratricide, and the toughest, nastiest pig takes over. And that is Napoleon Pig, who vanquishes Snowball Pig. That's two pigs, Lenin and Trotsky, or Stalin and Trotsky, if you like. Where is either Lenin or Stalin? you can't do this trick with two pigs. You need three. Now, there's a question in my mind about this, which goes directly to yours. Many people on the left in Orwell's day, and now, think that Leninism was one thing and Stalinism was another. That Lenin wanted a revolution and was not gentle about it, but was not a tyrant. Stalinism took over this revolution and, so to speak, disfigured, destroyed, negated it. Others, many conservatives to this day, think, no, it's the same thing. Lenin and Stalinism are the same. It's not completely possible to tell which Orwell thought. But in my opinion, the way he writes about it is as if to suggest that Snowball was right, that Trotsky was right, and that there had been an initial revolution that was worth fighting for, was worth defending, and that had been betrayed. And I say that for several reasons, as well as for the novel itself, with its imperfect allegory. One, he's fought in Spain with a group that was roughly speaking Trotskyist, that had a communist Marxist position against fascism, but didn't support Stalin. And he risked his life for it. The second is that the book within the book in 1984, the secret book that O'Brien purports to give to Smith, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, it's called, and its author's name is given as Emmanuel Goldstein. That text and that author are very clearly to me, well, I know, I mean, you can check it yourself, that is a direct lift from Revolution Betrayed by Leon Trotsky. That is Orwell's version of that book and that author. So I think that Orwell was not one of those who thought that Marxism and Stalinism were the same. In fact, very much to the contrary. That was a gesture. A polite one, I hope, in that case. A welcoming one. Sir.
My question is not so much.
See, that's why I shouldn't be the one doing it.
But perhaps of your other work. I'm wondering if you might discuss what appear to be some contradictions with respect to the argument you make about universal jurisdiction, the trial of Henry Kissinger, and your public statements with respect to the war and the administration.
Yeah, was the question heard by all? Okay. Well, I'm going to put this to your arbitration as well as mine, Elizabeth. The gentleman wants to ask me about some contradictions in my own position about universal jurisdiction as it applies to Henry Kissinger, and also my view about the war in Mesopotamia, which I'm quite happy to do, either now or afterwards. But I don't think you'll think I'm avoiding your question. I hope you won't. If I say that I'd rather be sure there are no more Orwell questions left before I do that, because I'm just as happy to talk about myself, trust me. But there may be some people who want to exhaust the Blair question. Sir.
Sir, would you mind commenting this directly to 1984 present world U.S.?
Ah. Okay, well, it is coming then.
Would you mind commenting because my view,
Can you speak up? Not for my sake, but for the others.
more and more, becoming more and more apparent to me what's the mergers of private businesses, military industrial complex, areas of finance, areas of energy, being somewhat consolidated under, suppose, governmental rules. I personally find very similar to what this person
Should I rephrase that question to, was it heard by all? It was not. Well, I might not be the best translator of it, but see if I do this fairly. The gentleman says that viewing the present circumstances, he means right here, of the convergence of business into monopoly and the fusion of that with state power and with warfare, that he wonders if the 1984 analogy doesn't apply as well to our own system. Would that be a fair précis? Okay. Well, first, I should give the answer. You're asking me about Orwell, not just my opinion, I hope. I'll give my own, of course, if you want. There's no question that Orwell wrote 1984 in the way that he did in order to say what he feared would happen if there was a permanent three-way Cold War where there were only three superpowers in the world, and that they could all coerce their own populations by keeping them in a state of constant readiness and conscription and rationing and fear of bombardments from others, which, if they weren't real, could be faked, and that these alliances could shift. They could be fighting another enemy, but the internal coercion would be the same. There's no question that that's what he thought would happen once the possibility of both dictatorship and nuclear weaponry were brought together. He wrote a brilliant piece called You and the Atom Bomb, is its name. It's well worth looking up, in about 1946, saying that the prospect of nuclear power meant that the danger of a existing dictatorship becoming permanent, unassailable, was greater than at any time since the Middle Ages, and that this was far greater than the threat of anarchy would be. And he put all of that into the book, and there's no question that that's what it's supposed to be based on. The nuclear point being very important, by the way, I think, because the world of 1984, which is the devastated, burned-out England that would be part of the United States, the Oceanic Empire, after a nuclear war. It's very specifically after atom bombs had exploded. It is very, very clearly what it is. So that's, yes, you're right in saying that Orwell had this theory of which was borrowed partly from James Burnham and other writers, of a state of the world being governed by three cynical empires who played each other off against the other. Were you asking me if I thought that described the present situation? Not in the least, no. In my opinion, no. It did, for a while, describe the Cold War quite well. It was possible, for example, for the United States to make an ally of China, having originally been willing to fight a nuclear war against it. Because China, though it was more totalitarian, and still is, than the Soviet Union, was willing to look at things more in the American way for its own reasons. I mean, shifts of allegiance of that kind did take place, as long as it was, roughly speaking, possible for the great power leaderships themselves to control events. And just to anticipate this gentleman's question, when Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, he was able to pull off a unique double, as far as I know, no one else has ever done this while Secretary of State, to be soft on fascism and soft on communism at the same time. Extraordinary. He was always groveling to Mao Zedong and bargaining with him, and always groveling and bargaining with Brezhnev in Moscow, and every now and then stomping on the Chileans or the East Timorese or the Cambodians or people who couldn't hit back. Remarkable fact. It still is the case, actually. Most of the business he does is with communist China, when it's not with corporations doing business in Chile. But this is in a more plural world. No, that what we're faced with now is a different kind of, in my judgment, a different kind of totalitarian threat altogether, one that is part state and part insurgent. It has an old name, jihad, holy war. Its methods are what you might call populistic or guerrilla-like. But its aim is the restoration of an empire that is gone, the Ottoman Caliphate, which was an empire of religion. And an empire based on monotheism is by definition totalitarianism, because, as Orwell was, I think, very quick to realize, the origin of worship, the origin of the need of people, this is what I was cautioning you against. Don't worry, there'll always be people who want to have the will to power. What you have to worry about is how many of you have the will to obey. How many of you want to be taken care of and looked after? How many of you want to be part of a servile system where you trade your freedom for security? That's the danger you can do something about. Well, the religious dictatorship promises all that and an extra life on top. With sometimes, depending on which monotheism it happens to be, virgins thrown in. I think virgins are overrated myself, both among men and among women. But I don't think that the Islamic fanatics have read the Jewish commentary on this, which says that with every virgin comes a mother-in-law. But that's about the only joke you can make about this kind of thing. You're up against something that is deeply subversive and nihilistic, but also fantastically authoritarian, and wishes to have state power, wishes to have absolute power over you in your private and public life. It's the most totalitarian threat you could face, and it deals in the most nihilistic methods in order to achieve its aim. And of course it is self-destructive. It will, of course, fail. It will, of course, destroy itself. It will, of course, destroy the religion and the Muslim society that it purports to uphold. Of course, this is all axiomatic. We've known it forever. All jihads have always failed for this reason. But that it's to be compared with Halliburton, as you implied, is frivolous. Quite frivolous. Purely frivolous. Drop it. You'll feel better.